Yeah, for those participants that have already joined, we're just waiting for a couple of minutes until the majority has joined, and then we'll start. Okay, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to all of you, wherever you are in the part of the world. Very much welcome to this webinar on enterprise adoption and Web3 technology. I'm Walter. I'm the moderator of this illustrious panel, and we'll go more into detail later. But we have Laurie Thomas from the US, who is an enterprise guru and been selling and delivering solutions to enterprise businesses her whole life. We have Peter Luchatz from Parity Technologies and the Polkadot ecosystem, who also has a lot of background in enterprise business, so more about it later. And we have Alan Vey, the CEO founder of Aventus. I'm sure a lot of you already know him. I'm Walter. I'm as you can see on the color of my hair, I'm quite of a veteran too. I've worked my whole life in enterprise businesses, 30 plus years now. And I've always enjoyed it, always been on the delivery and product side, innovation side, and I've always seen how technology has been brought to life, new technology. So today we're going to talk about Web3 and its adoption in the enterprise market specifically. And if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button, so I invite you all to post the questions there, but also later on in the call, we will actually open up for questions. So there should be plenty of room to do that. How we've set it up is we're really going to deep dive in these three different topics that each speaker will talk about. But before we go there, I want to tee up a little bit on what it actually is what we're talking about when it comes to blockchain or Web3 technologies and enterprises. What is very typical in enterprise businesses, of course, is that the most of them already run quite a successful business, and they do so with a well-defined value proposition. And of course, technology plays a very, very important role into delivering that value proposition to their customers. And what's particularly interesting also in the phase we're in now with Web3 or blockchain and enterprise adoption is to really understand how enterprises adapt to these new technologies. How do they incorporate these new technologies in how they operate or in how they deliver to their customers? And that's not new for an enterprise. We've seen the internet coming, or I've seen the internet coming. I've worked in a company without email, believe it or not. And the adoption, for example, for TCP/IP, the protocol that's used in the internet, the technology was first adopted, and then intranet games, and then when the market was a little bit more mature, actually all the enterprises switched to public internet services and took it from there. We've seen the same with cloud technology. A lot of enterprises started to adapt their legacy applications, made them cloud ready, but then first started with private cloud, and then later on when the public cloud, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Azure became much more mature, a lot of them switched to public clouds, and there's hardly any business left, including banks, that uses private clouds. So similar, I think, is true with Web3. In 2009, we all remember Bitcoin came, and it was actually a new form of money that was disintermediating the banks. Quite how do you say it pronounced now, because with all the troubles with the banks. But this Bitcoin used the blockchain, and then later on in 2015 or so, Ethereum came along with the first world computer, and a lot of projects and experiments started to build on that layer using that blockchain. Then, of course, Gavin Wood, who we all know and love from, first of all, Ethereum as the CTO, but later on as the founder of the Polkadot ecosystem, and of course, the old CEO of Parity Technologies. He then also built a whole new concept where we split the governance and the work of the blockchain itself. And now we're actually entering the phase where blockchains become much more modular, and that a lot of the compute is actually abstracted away from the blockchain. So you can execute applications wherever you want, and you start using the block space in a different way. So and that whole evolution, I should say, of the architecture, I think makes it very timely now that the enterprises really start to take it serious, because a lot of the arguments of can we trust it, how would it fit into our existing enterprise architecture and technology choices are much easier answered these days. But still, you know, why would a CIO or a CEO risk his career by doing it all themselves? Because that's, of course, the promise of Web3, and no third party, no custodian, you're doing it yourself. But in a corporate structure, that means that if it goes wrong, that is very clear who messed up. And that's typically what the board members of corporates do not really like. And you choose IBM because you will not get fired. So how does that play out? What does it take on that front to get ready? Is a managed service still an answer to the decentralization promise of Web3? Those type of topics. Anyway, but enough said there, but that's really the spectrum of it all. So the technology is there, it's getting to maturity, the first experiences are there, enterprises starting to adopt to it. I know that from myself, from Energy Web, of course. I see the same in Aventus. There's real operational systems now that use Web3 technologies and also blockchains to basically transform the way they work. So that's, I think we're now really at that point where we can see the coming years more and more enterprise adopting. So we thought it's very timely to do this webinar now, to really go one step deeper and see where are we really at with enterprise adoption and Web3. So let me start with you, Peter, if that's okay with you. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about your background. Of course, you're now at Parity Technology, but you have a life before Parity and Polkadot. Perhaps a little bit about your background and also what it is that made you decide to actually move to the Parity and Polkadot ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Walter, and it's an honor and I'm humbled to be here. So thank you for the invitation. And yeah, so I spent, I would say, the last 20 years, and that has become my passion, being an engineer as a background in technology marketing, which mostly was software as a service. So I worked 7 years at Microsoft, both in Seattle and Germany for the BizApps division. I worked at Salesforce, but also at startups and emerging companies like Celonis, process mining company from Germany. And blockchain was always something I had on the radar, watching it, because I was always attracted to new technology innovation. So that is kind of the footprint of my career if I look back. And of course, at first, I think I followed I would call it the traps that many fell into, or the distraction, which was, this is all about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. So that actually very narrow, but very prominent and headline grabbing use case of DeFi and investments and all that. But starting talking to Polkadot or the team of Parity, and then doing some research, I realized there is an entire groundswell of an emerging technology and adoption happening, which goes way beyond that initial Bitcoin use case. You mentioned Ethereum, which was a kind of a first technology that emerged with smart contracts. And yes, now Polkadot being a project that was built after Ethereum with some of the learnings applied to a modern approach. I have to say, after digging deeper into it, I said, this is kind of game changing. The concept, the team's mission, and what the team had accomplished so far. So I joined last July after they had already ramped up 20 parachains, and we can later go into what that means. So show it's significant traction. And I said to myself, so this is another time, this is another inflection point where technology breaks through. And I like these moments, right? Drive adoption and convey kind of value and help people understand what is the value of this new technology? Can they use it in various business cases, and actually educate them broad audience, because I'm in marketing, broad audience, like making them help understand what this means for them. And most of all, what is the value? Because I think between all the talk about technology, sometimes the value is a bit hidden. So I'm glad we can talk about it maybe today.
Great. Well, that's an impressive background. And I remember it too. I remember I was actually working at ING Bank where a consultant of McKinsey came to me and said, oh, there's this blockchain thing, and it was 2015. And I looked at it and I fell in the same trap as you. It was Bitcoin, of course. So I bought some, luckily enough, for $600. But that was not reason. But then I noticed too that being an electrical engineer, actually having a protocol and being able to natively transfer value in a way that anybody can verify it. Yeah, that is extremely disruptive also for, I think, for a lot of sectors. But if you would take the view from Polkadot parity, and you look at the enterprise market, because the enterprise market is huge, of course, but where do you see the real edge that the technology setup and also perhaps the use case of Polkadot, the architecture of Polkadot, where do you see, where do you want to play, basically, if it was up to you?
So let's look at first at the market and what we observe from an enterprise adoption or use cases. I think many people now are aware of these NFT brand loyalty use cases, which was kind of emerging from this whole NFT drop waves that hit us, I think, beginning of last year. What I see emerging, and this is not so much public, you see it when you go deeper into conversations, when you observe what conversation happening, I don't say behind closed doors, but really in the forums and so on, and see how many people from enterprise background actually do something. What I see is there is no single use case. It's a technology that can be broadly adopted, which spins up such a broad spectrum of use cases, which I just find fascinating. So there is no recipe. That creates a challenge also for enterprises, because of course, there's a technology, and first trying to find out what that means for me is innovation management. I mean, every enterprise has to deal with new technology and make an assessment, and cannot put their head in the sand, but needs to make an assessment. Is it relevant for us? And we can talk later about the approaches. I see the different strategies to do that. And then there are, of course, like out of the box use cases which are evolving, like brand loyalty, or like new customer interactions, and I can mention some example of that. So that's kind of a packaged use case. The fashion industry is using NFTs now to make some loyalty programs. We see, of course, events with a proof of concept. So, and a lot of it is around NFTs, but we see also supply chains. We see many other use cases. And I think many teams and enterprise innovation teams have now a Web3 kind of competency of building those up. And they're looking into this, and they're going to the conferences. We had the discussion. We were in South by Southwest last week with 20 projects on a booth, and I had the use cases there because we weren't sure who's coming. So we had a broad spectrum of use cases, and people were very, very curious with an enterprise background to learn about it and make it real. From Polkadot perspective,
Peter, do you see them still in the innovation corner, or do you already see also moving more to real deployments?
So the challenge is I cannot talk openly about it, but I know about a couple of projects, which sometimes we do also with these top 3 consulting projects, which go very deep. So I know from projects in the Polkadot ecosystem that work with Toyota, that work with Airbus Industries and Bosch, and these are not like gaming names, right? These are, I mean, 100-year-old German kind of established companies, and these use cases go deep into their value chain, redefining customer interaction or doing internal optimization. So we will see those cases emerging very soon. One obvious one is a music platform, of course, in delivering music and art, so intellectual property in a new way to customers, which I think, and also you can talk more about it. We had this announcement recently. So it's a lot of things happening right now, and I feel like we're at the tipping point. I feel like we're at a tipping point where this gets now really traction in the market. So you asked the question, where is Polkadot? So I would consider Polkadot being a pioneers kind of ecosystem, a pioneers network. And I mean pioneer because if you look at Ethereum, what can you do there? You can build smart contracts. And this is kind of an easy established way of delivering a Web3 project, but it's a little bit of cookie cutter and very contained into what you can do with these smart contracts and apps on top of it. Mm-hmm. What Polkadot has made is something that goes much deeper, which is allowing teams to deploy their own blockchain. Because if you want to do their own tokens, if you have a use case that needs to disrupt your industry, you need to think about complex business logics, or you want to have more control about the tokens and how the business logic works, and want to actually tune and optimize this blockchain to your use case, you got to build your own blockchain. However, Polkadot does this in the most affordable and technology-wise advanced way, because we take care of all this validation in the background and most of all interoperability. So when a team joins Polkadot, they don't build on their own. They join I call it a family of already 50 custom blockchains where we have synergy effects because the components, the modular approach allows teams to exchange functionality. For example, we have one chain that does digital identity and serves it already 3 other chains. So you do not need to rebuild the wheel every time. You can use a growing number of modules that are available in this marketplace, which you have at Amazon also with a microservice architecture, and you can kind of pull services there. Think of it as a block space. We call it the block space. It's a combination of many, many custom blockchains where you can benefit from. And the interoperability, which Polkadot allows, it's completely like a next generation blockchain ecosystem that we're building here. And the next thing is, just to finish that, the applications on top of that, the decentralized applications, the dApps, are multi-chain of nature. I can show you an example where an app is using functionality from 3 different custom blockchains and creates a hybrid or a composite dApp, which just creates much more innovation space. You can do just much more. The possibilities are much more endless. However, it's beginning a little bit harder to explain and understand. And that is why maybe some people kind of think of Polkadot as the engineering kind of chain or engineering ecosystem, because the technology is so advanced. But I want to pause here and not take too much oxygen, but it's important to understand this is a completely different approach.
Understood. Yeah, I think what you touch upon, and I think that's very relevant for particularly for enterprises, is that rather than having everything sitting in one, let's say, vertical, and if you want to integrate it into your existing IT environment, you have to adapt to that. It's much more modular, so you can pick and choose. And also, I think my last question to you would be, Peter, the ecosystem is one thing, and I agree that's brilliant with the parachains for those who know, and all the let's say cross-chain messaging and the derived security from the relay chain, and so you can basically just use it rather than have to build it. But on the integration side into the enterprises, do you see developments there too? Because people, whether you like it or not, they have SAP, they have accounting systems, they have CISOs, chief information security officers. Do you see a lot of activity there too on to make that simpler or better or easier to integrate? Or is that something that's still to be done?
I see that evolving. But what I also see is this blockchain architecture that we built. It's complex the way it's being set up, but at the end we have applications in blockchain database and we have APIs that serve, of course, or different ways of interaction. If you think of enterprise architecture, I mean, this is possible. We have this right now with many enterprise projects because they cannot build something standalone. It has to be integrated in their CRM system or in the supply chain systems that exist. I would not consider this a roadblock or by any means. This is, I mean, 20 years ago, of course, I mean, APIs weren't that common. You had to kind of build everything from scratch. Then came microservices, APIs, whatever, middleware architectures and all that. Nowadays, I mean, we apply these modern principles also in the blockchain space. So I don't think that is a technology-wise a big issue. I think what's more important, but you also have to always have to kind of balance between what is the investment, what are the hurdles, with what is at stake or what is the opportunity. And we can talk about this later, like, okay, why should an enterprise even consider looking at blockchain? What are the use cases and how to approach this? I think it's a very interesting discussion also, and we also see learnings there because we see so many different approaches, how they go for this topic.
Great. Okay, let me pause you there indeed, Peter, and then let's go into that topic with Laurie. So hi, Laurie. Good morning to Laurie, in different time zone. Yeah, Laurie is a business executive and he's been in enterprise technology and making that, let's say, that integration of new technology and services. That's basically what you get up for every day, I would say, Laurie. But perhaps you can tell it much more better. So can you tell a little bit about your background, Metal, what Metal is doing and what you're doing at Metal?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me this morning. So as you mentioned, I've been in the telecommunications and technology industry for about 30 years in a whole host of different, from startups to Fortune 50 companies, always working with the enterprise. That's whatever the capacity and whatever the organization. I've always worked very closely with business leaders. I've been at Medtel for the last decade, and Medtel is a industry-leading global communication solutions provider. So we help enterprises digitally transform, whether it's POTS transformation or global mobility and IoT deployments, or managed network services like SD-WAN, now SASE, and edge compute. And my role, my organization within Medtel works with those enterprises very closely with those executive business leaders to understand their business, their industry, and their unique business very deeply, help them pick the right solutions. And a big part of that is education, giving them industry thought leadership on emerging trends, and often help them rationalize the business case and the ROI for these transformational programs that they're looking to adopt and that we deploy and manage for them. You know, and it's really such an interesting time now with, you know, blockchain and what we're seeing and what I'm seeing in the enterprise. And it's very aligned with some of the things Peter touched on. You know, that same growth pattern from the internet, it's on that same trajectory, although it took the internet 30 years, and it's going much, much faster than that in terms of adoption. And, you know, already 80% of the world's largest 100 companies out of market cap are already using blockchain, and about 30 of them in a live production environment. Although I don't think it's at the tipping point yet, well, and I can't say when that will be, but I think it's going to take some of these giant brands, exactly what Peter was saying, having the use cases to get more enterprise adoption. You know, from my view, enterprises, these business leaders, different than consumers or just technology enthusiasts, they're not going to go adopt a technology because it's cool or it's the latest trend and emerging technologies. They're going to adopt something when it's faster, better, more robust, more secure than whatever they have today to solve those business needs, and it needs to be consumable. Yeah. So, you know, it's much like what I saw in AI and robotic process automation years ago. It's so similar where, and it wasn't that long ago, where boards and business leaders said, we know we need AI, we know we need robotic process automation, but they couldn't find the first step in their industry, their business, to make that investment and go forward. And, you know, from the customers I talked to, also what was mentioned there, they're looking more comfortably with a hybrid type scenario where data can transverse from a public to private environment securely. Although, you know, most of the early adopters are going in a full permission type environment, and there's a host of things we can talk about with challenges and scale to that. But again, it's not surprising, as you know, the intranet was where they were comfortable before the internet, and private cloud to public cloud. So I think it's on that same trajectory, and I think they're really fascinated, and they see unparalleled benefits to copy protection and you know, digital certificates and supply chain provenance, but they need something tangible in their business to say, yes, this is how we can deploy it. And I'm sure Alan has, you know, can bring some of those use cases to life.
Definitely, I think. No, I recognize completely what you're saying, Laurie. And just speaking for Energy Web, I know something about it too. And there's a real use case in the energy sector, obviously, where we're moving away from central big electrical power plants to much more an agile network of EVs and rooftop solar. And there actually the whole decentralization trend comes from the core of the business. You know, you have energy assets that are being procured and paid for by what you used to call customers. And that if you integrate them smartly into your energy grid, then you can actually basically not only benefit the customer, but also operate your whole network for much lower cost. So, and in Energy Web, under the leadership of Jesse, they're making great progress. And that's really at the point where the businesses are coming to life. But these business cycles are quite different. And one question for you, Laurie, would be if you look, because you have a huge customer base, of course, in the US, and if you, how shall I say, how is it with the deployment of Web3 tech? Is it a topic that's being looked at by the innovation teams, or you also mentioned that there's already some deployments, but and if so, what are the biggest challenges basically for these enterprises to adopt this technology?
Yeah, so I typically work with most of the technologists in the organization, but one of the biggest key considerations is now this is pervasive in Web3 into other parts of the industry, where the chief marketing officers and the business leaders want to go and adopt, whether it's a loyalty program or something to get more, engagement with their customers. And these technologists don't want 8 different business leaders within their own organization going out and deploying a solution for a particular to solve one business need. So they're very interested in learning about it and also getting involved, getting key stakeholders so that they can control it and work with their vendors and not have it control them and then be in an unstable environment. And I think, it with everything in the press and what you hear on maybe more of the DeFi and the crypto side, I think they get that's a narrow element of it and they see the value, but yet they want to make sure they have the right support within their organization and they have the right understanding of data protection and data privacy and regulatory and compliance issues. And they're real issues, but they deal with those with any new technology. So it's just making sure, what do I need to think about and who do I need to engage internally and externally to bring that together for a solution? And I do think the customers we're working with at MetTel, we're launching we have an innovation lab for new technology, but it'll be specific to Web3 Innovation Lab. And I think that's, very attractive to a lot of our enterprises where they have a safe sandbox to then start to work with, experts in the field and figure out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and is that similar to how you did that with the whole AI proposition of MetTel and the adoption there?
It is actually, first we did it ourselves and drank the Kool-Aid and proved the model, and it was tremendously successful, and we were able to then share that success with our customers. They secondarily benefited from it, from our SD-WAN and being able to triage and remediate it before it even hit their IT help desk and fix the problem. So once they saw that, then yes, we brought it into our innovation lab for our customers. And not like different than what we did with Starlink just recently. That was got a lot of press with that. We're taking Starlink for our SD-WAN for a government deployment, and we were able to bring it in the lab first, prove it out, work out the kinks in a safe environment, and then deploy it.
I agree. I think that's the way to I think CIOs, even Gartner, I think, is writing a lot about it these days. They have to find a way to adapt it. So companies like yourself creating an environment where they can easily play around with it between brackets, I think is awesome. And what do you think? Because we also touched a little bit on the stuff that's now happening in crypto in general, particularly in the US. I would say Mr. Gensler from the SEC is not a real fan, I would say, of freeing up the market, which is unusual, I would say, for the US. But nevertheless, is that regulatory thing, is that a big topic in the US at all if you talk to enterprises about, or is that something, can they really basically see that, or that's in more around the crypto itself rather than the underlying technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a moving target for sure. And, in that space, you see huge swings around the world, some countries all in and some completely banning it. So, that moving target or the perceived instability of that is scary. But I do think most business leaders recognize that's more on the digital asset crypto type environment and more on the DeFi space than it is for business needs using the technology and the science of cryptography and bringing copy protection. And I think they think of it, they recognize it's very different. And so I don't think that's so much of an inhibitor. I think it's more just knowing, what do I need to think about to make sure that there's good protection? And I actually think that if there's smart regulation and, it shouldn't inhibit innovation. And in fact, it could promote growth because they know where their boundaries are as an enterprise and what they can do and not do. And then they can deploy it safely for their consumers and for themselves.
Totally. Well, I think the other benefit is that because it's a global technology and a global ecosystem, there are countries that do embrace it, like Switzerland or Dubai, the states there, or Singapore. So they can really perhaps leapfrog this into their markets. All right, thank you, Laurie. Swiftly moving over to Alan. Hey, Alan. I think, so what Peter, of course, touched upon was more the Polkadot ecosystem and the technology and the role of parity into it. Laurie made it much more clear on, much more from the enterprise side, where they have invested billions already in existing technology, how do you actually get that new technology adapted into your core processes? And you're, of course, in the middle of that with real use cases and whatnot more. But perhaps for those who don't know, you get a little bit on your background and on Aventus and where you came from and how you fit into the Polkadot ecosystem these days.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Walter. And hey, everyone, thanks for being here to listen to us. So quickly on my background, I kind of came from an artificial intelligence background. I've been working in the world of finance, doing kind of predictive strategies. I then did a master's in artificial intelligence the year that Ethereum launched. And Peter spoke a bit about smart contracts before and seeing what that opened up for the world of blockchain, going from Bitcoin, which is a medium of exchange, really, an innovative one, to something that's more general purpose, where you can build these custom business processes. I saw so much opportunity, essentially a new sort of tool in the tool belt, if you might, the technology tool belt to solve problems with properties that never previously before were possible. So from 2015, it was really exploring different applications of blockchains and building various startups trying to make that happen. We were involved in the sort of ICO wave of 2017 and subsequent bust, the early days of NFTs when all of those started, and then sort of through COVID, seeing how supply chains had to drastically evolve and the kind of role blockchain could play in that. So where we've ended up with Aventus is being all about helping bring that knowledge to enterprises, helping onboard enterprises. We've always been fairly agnostic as to the base technology. Our view, I think Peter mentioned the term before, block space. We really like that term, block space. If you think of the way you rent space on a server today with certain requirements that are solution specific, blockchain is ultimately going to be very similar part of that kind of tool belt. And so you will have what we typically see businesses have different use cases that have different technical requirements around throughput or latency or data privacy. So the best solutions are modular, composable architectures, and often a combination of different blockchains talking to each other, or at least different fundamental principles. Laurie mentioned the kind of risk-averse approach to adopting the technology. So many people will start in a permission setup, which basically means they have complete control of that ecosystem. But more and more as they get familiar with it, migrate to a more public infrastructure. Yeah. So we started out in the Ethereum ecosystem. We did a review of all of the kind of open source technology with which we could deliver these business use cases. And we determined sort of completely independently, there's no financial relationship between us and the Polkadot ecosystem, but we determined that they had the best technology to be able to deliver on these use cases. And specifically, that's called the sort of substrate, the open source stuff that Polkadot is built on. So our business is all about helping deploy that block space, whether it be in a permissioned manner or in a public manner where you want to connect into that interoperable ecosystem. We have an instantiation of our block space product, which we call the Aventus network, which is active on the Polkadot ecosystem. And as Peter was kind of mentioning, can talk to over 50 different blockchains in that ecosystem, never mind all the Ethereum-based ones as well. So over 100 different sort of base blockchains. And then we do tooling on top of that. So anything an enterprise, anything you would need to uphold an enterprise-grade SLA and the key sort of tools, right? So key management is a very important component. Then there's data access and writing back in an enterprise way with layered software, disaster recovery, redundancy within the system, all of those things that you need to deploy proper solutions on a blockchain. So in a nutshell, that's where Aventus is today, and slowly but surely rolling this out across supply chain and the loyalty market primarily.
Right. And you're talking, of course, blockchain 24/7, 365 days a week. And if you would say, okay, if you would do the Pareto on your conversation, so what is that 80% of your conversations is about when you talk to an enterprise business leader from your perspective? Do you still have to explain what a blockchain is? Do you have to convince them? What is it that they bring up?
Yeah, so there might be slight selection bias because we go after industries we believe are slightly more attuned to what's going on. But from what we see, I'd say Laurie made a really good point before around blockchain, not crypto. Number one is we need to deal with any of the potential risk factors, mitigate risk first, and then we can understand what the solutions are. So I would say that point is very important. The underlying technology has great value to be applied to different use cases. The tokens and the crypto and the decentralized finance, all of that piece you kind of keep to one side. And once you help people understand the difference, then you really unlock that kind of first barrier. Some get it already, some headlines, bad headlines are flashy, right? I think something like negative sentiment sticks 4 times better than positive sentiment with you. So there's always that in the background of people's heads. I'd say that's point number one. And then number two is just, it's changed over the last year, I'd say, from, oh, that's that new technology, let's see what happens with it, to, oh, there's that new technology, we need to justify to the board why we are or are not getting involved in that market. Yeah. And so when it comes to why are we not getting involved, or why are we getting involved, the question is, how do we apply it? And I think both Laurie and Peter spoke quite nicely on this point. It's so versatile, and a few easy applications, but other, especially around supply chain and loyalty that we're finding, but others are much, much more complex and require a partner that can kind of hold their hand through that process. So that, I would say, is one of the most important elements of adoption right now. And we see BCG, McKinsey, all the big consultants, right, putting out great reports, Gartner's putting out great stuff. The education is happening. Now it's just about taking the things they've seen and applying it to the business.
Yeah, and on that note, because that's also what I noticed, at least in AnyWeb, if you, and I think Laurie also talked about it, and Peter too, is that if you can actually show it rather than talk about it, it's always much more powerful. So give me an example of a really good use case that is live now within the Aventus network, that or going live soon, that's on top of your mind, that's really a good example of what's happening these days.
Yeah, I would say let's pick one from the loyalty category and one from the supply chain category.
Yep.
So on the loyalty side, we have a use case live. It's been live for about a year now. I think we're processing maybe 2 or 3 million transactions a month for this client. This is sort of cash backup provider. So essentially what we have done is help them to structure a closed payment economy where people are exchanging discount vouchers. So when a merchant purchases, when a consumer purchases something in a merchant, they get given cash back. Because of blockchain infrastructure, there's properties around microtransactions, which allow for much quicker settlement of these payments, of these discount vouchers. So from a user experience perspective, you get real utility from this cash back much faster. You don't have to wait until you have $100 before you can cash it out or you can spend it again. The minute you get 5 cents, you can spend that 5 cents on your coffee again. But then on the business side is where the real benefits come. And we've been able to increase net margins by 25% for this client and reduce balance sheet debt by 80%. And really on that front, it's looking at restructuring fundamentally what this closed economy of cashback looks like. And that representation as a blockchain, it's tokenization play. The tokenization of that on the blockchain changes how essentially it's more like looking at a collateralization of negative value, a discount voucher against inventory, rather than debt that sits on the balance sheet at obviously $1 per point or whatever it is. So there were really great efficiencies, both from the user experience perspective, but also from the business profitability perspective that were had for that solution. Then in the world of supply chain, we have an interesting use case live in aviation, so cargo tracking. This is looking at, the problem is 5 to 10% of cargo goes missing as it moves through the supply chain from an aviation perspective. This is a $400 million problem for airlines annually. So there's a big, big problem to be solved in just helping pinpoint where these things are. So if you look at putting IoT devices within these containers and then managing the identity and the credentials of those devices on a blockchain-based system, you have a very scalable IoT infrastructure that one can handle the kind of throughput that you would see from IoT devices, and two is more secure. There isn't the sort of honeypot where you can attack one point and compromise the network. It's a distributed architecture. You compromise part of the network, the rest of the network keeps going. So this solution is in the early stages of being rolled out. It's in MVP right now, but really already seeing significant value add to the industry around creating that backbone of interoperability to just locate and track information about things as they move through the supply chain.
Yeah, it's a very good example indeed. I think IoT and blockchain are such an integral part, or will be, because of the identity space, and also I think the cybersecurity benefits. It's a really good use case indeed. Just going back to you, Peter. If you are an enterprise executive, and how would you start? Because you know your CEO says, of course, why don't we don't anything with blockchain? That's typically how it starts. But do you start with picking out a blockchain, or what do you encounter, or how do you actually want to position the Polkadot ecosystem in that decision-making process? Perhaps I'm sure you have a view on that.
Yeah, yes, I do. So we see, as the market is still new, different approaches of enterprises assessing and going into the space. I mean, you mentioned, or it has been mentioned, McKinsey, BCG. So they're not looking. They've been contacted. Hey, we have this great workshop on blockchain. Can we show you something? So there is, of course, already some pressure happening, some selling happening about innovation use cases, because, of course, a large consulting company make revenue in providing value and navigating these new spaces, these new innovative spaces, and then show it. So that's one approach. But still the question is, okay, how do we do it? And there's a linear approach, which is, and we see that many large companies nowadays, because of this advancement of cloud and AI and all that, they have set up these, and I think Laurie, you mentioned it, these innovation kind of hubs, or they have outsourced this to some of these consulting companies that manage innovation hubs, actually do even POCs and little sandbox startups for enterprises. But I think it is how an enterprise manages innovation as a whole informs a little bit the approach. So, but we see very often large companies in the tech sector, of course, or who know they need to kind of constantly innovate because of competitive pressure, or need to see the next opportunity, building out these innovation kind of teams. And Web3 is a topic there. We see, I mean, many large companies have Web3 people. If you go on LinkedIn and filter Web3 and filter by enterprise, you will find 10,000s of people who are kind of already working on enterprise. So they navigate this space, they think about it. From a methodical approach, what we've seen is it's really two approaches. I think one is these teams look out for existing use cases which showed already kind of some traction. They look at reference cases, communication about big use cases in their industry or from other industries, and think about, can I apply this? Right. The loyalty program is something that is on vogue with all direct-to-customer or luxury companies and media companies and all that. Can we monetize NFTs, being virtual representatives of our physical goods? Fashion industry is a topic. Can we redefine the interaction with the end user, who becomes more an owner and a stakeholder, redefining the relationship between what formerly was a consumer of a product enterprise? So they go after these use cases and try to kind of copy or kind of adopt them for their use cases. So that's kind of an inside, outside in. But we also see companies, some large companies who admit we don't know yet, and they start kind of hackathons or internal hackathons, and they create an ideation process. And we have some Parachain teams who do that also broadly, and it's like, okay, it's kind of a shotgun approach, and we see what sticks. But they want to have an external kind of, because they know it's so new, they leverage kind of innovation from, and we do this ourselves, we do hackathons to create more people in the ecosystem of Polkadot. So we see both approaches. I think there's another thing we need to kind of take into account, which I think should inform that, which is, for some companies, blockchain is an opportunity, an absolute opportunity to kind of build out new revenue sources or create more deeper interaction with a consumer base, which changed their behavior to be more stakeholders, autonomous, and own their own thing, and be much more cautious about their data. But there's also risk, of course, if a competitor uses the technology faster than you, and then there's this risk of a whole business being completely redefined, business models redefined. So we see cases in the music industry which usually go to kind of the big streaming services, and then the producer, or the components, or the DJ of the music doesn't see much, right? They only see the revenue, the revenue coming at the end of the month, but the interaction directly with the end users, not happening. Think of a world now where each music is attached to an NFT, each streaming service, and you know, or at least you know the wallet who has purchased it, and you can tie add-on services. This is redefining an industry like, I think the switch to kind of from video cassettes to kind of streaming was one. So think of business model disruption, which is also, we see some early steps of that. Business model disruption and change in some industries, which might be a fundamental risk of companies if they don't adhere to it. So I think these teams need to not only watch out for concrete use cases, but also for more deeper changes, which also might be an opportunity as a first mover advantage. So that's kind of the whole continuum of things, how they approach it. So Polkadot now, we try to position Polkadot not in any vertical. Alan talked about it also. It's the most versatile. And I have to say, if I look, and of course we always look at other platforms and what they pursue, and I see a lot of specialization of other blockchain protocols, and they promote their transaction per second as a performance metric, because that is relevant for a specific narrow use case, more in the financial, decentralized financial, because it's all about the transaction. Other use cases are more about this loyalty thing or certain gaming verticals, and you see clearly that they create that around the possibilities or the narrow possibilities of the technology. What I see with Polkadot is we do not want, and we do not depend on any vertical or any industry, because it is so versatile, because teams and people can build a custom blockchain that suits their use case. So it's really like what your use case depends on what you build on Polkadot, and Polkadot with the SDK, with the blockchain framework, and with the affordability, because major pieces like the validation, as I said earlier, is already been taken care of. You can deploy, it's kind of a, you can do things which you think don't connect, which is I can do something custom but very fast. In software, you either go standard or you go kind of custom, and the custom is expensive, and the package is kind of the fast way. We kind of broke that paradigm and said, you can do custom but very affordable and fast, and that is what attracts teams to Polkadot. And then comes, of course, this network effect we covered over a couple of times. So what we observe now, if I look at the teams at Polkadot, they are redefining their industries. The innovation level of the use cases is so deep that I would call it Polkadot a pioneers network. If you really want to disrupt your industry, if you really think deep about doing something new, these are the teams that come to Polkadot and conquer the market and conquer a new world. That's how I would frame it, and that's what Polkadot is for.
Yeah, that's very clear, and I echo that. I think if you are now in an executive team of any enterprise and you're not taking this technology serious, then you're basically risking your business. We had a very interesting discussion. I'm like Laurie, I'm also an old telco guy. Well, she's of course not a telco guy, but I am. And if you think about how a telecom or mobile operator is set up, it's basically they have this big database where they keep all the mobile phone numbers, and you can subscribe to that telco operator, and then your mobile phone number gets connected to your device, and then you can make calls. But if we envision a world where we all have our own decentralized digital identity, then how would you serve those devices that might not be in your central database? That completely transforms the business models of operators. And I think the intelligence moving to the edge or whatever you call it. But of course, you can ignore it and say we're fine. But that's similar to the WhatsApp texting drama that happened to mobile. That texting was for free and they called it WhatsApp. So I think it's a huge transformative risk. I agree. And at the same time, there are very practical use cases, like also Ellen alluded to, that are real, that are being done today. And yeah, I encourage everybody on the call, if not already doing so, to start experimenting with it or take it very serious and adapt to it, because I don't think it's a technology that's going away. Laurie, just one question for you still is, if you look at your customer base, because you have very traditional customers, of course, you have more innovative customers. Do you actually see the more innovative customers now embracing it and the others sitting on the sideline, or is it broader than that? Is it Is it really entering, or where are we in that cycle, you think?
Well, we do sit across all the industry verticals, and there is always the spectrum of the early adopters and the laggards, where the technology has to be falling off the wall before they're going to change it because they're so risk averse. But I do think that there is a large portion that are already internally discussing and investigating and working with key partners and experts in the industry, whether it's, Gartner and the industry analysts, or, organizations like here that can help them. I think it's not just a incredible new technology, but it has complementary attributes that make some of the deployments they already have better, which they couldn't do before. So as an example, you all touched on mobility and IoT. Many of our IoT customers, when you see it, IDC says by 2025, there'll be over 41 billion connected devices, and it's growing and growing. So these customers already have IoT, global deployments, mass amount of data, but what can they do with it? All of these customers are constantly talking to us about, how do I grow revenue? How do I increase operational efficiency, mitigate risk, and get stickier with my customers, have better client sat? And so with all this IoT data flowing, that's fine, but what can I do with that? And Alan touched on this, and Peter, with the different capabilities and protocols, being able to not just have that data securely flow within all these disparate systems that they have instantaneously, but I think it's the data recall that's lacking, and a lot of enterprises see blockchain as that next evolution of how they're going to stay ahead of the curve and ahead of their competition. And so that's a big part of the discussions that we're having, and also around the supply chain. Many customers are just looking for a better way to have, that digital certificate and copy protection to understand, how do I recall that data quickly and make sure that they can do that through smart contracts or through better SLAs, getting rid of those intermediaries and saving a tremendous amount, and being able to just have a seamless transaction and just a frictionless environment for their customers. So, I think on our early adopters, they're there. They're not publicly communicating it yet because there's still a little bit of that wait and see and want to have a success story, but they're actively talking about it. And I think to organizations that are in industry consortiums like Energy Web, like you talked about, I think that's a great jumping point, because they're already, it doesn't have to necessarily be in a provisioned environment, but they have a closed kind of membership community that they can learn from one another and share data more seamlessly and safely. So I think those are also the automotive industry and healthcare, CPG, retail. Those are the industries that I'm talking about most with.
Got you. Yeah, all clear. Yeah, I see some questions have come in, but it's clearly a fan, which I really enjoy, of Energy Web. So it's not necessarily a webinar on Energy Web, but I can answer them anyway in short form. So as we all know, Energy Web will launch its own relay chain in the Polkadot ecosystem, and I can say that's all going very well. And it's also true that Aventus is helping us with making that real. And that's basically all I can say about it, but and the rest is for Jesse. But we're well on track, and I even saw a tweet already that on our testnet people have noticed something. Yes, both Aventus and Energy Web, we like to build real stuff. So yeah, you will see stuff on the testnet and later on also on all the net, and it's all going according to plan. But Ellen, just quickly on your side then, a last question. Because we talked about technology, and what I think is particularly fascinating about blockchain in general is that it's not only about the technology, but it's also about, of course, the value you can natively transfer with it. Just imagine that internet was built with the features of blockchain inside, that then Amazon actually would have to pay the universities that have invented the TCP/IP protocol, that type of business models. But also, I think the aspect we've not really talked about is the governance, and that you can actually delegate a lot of the decisions to your community members, and then automatically deploy those changes, etc. And I think particularly there, when it comes to business model innovation in enterprises, if you want to really get sticky customers, I think involving them in certain decisions or product launches or testing, and how relevant are those, let's say, elements of Web3, the governance part of it? And do you see that's a topic at all, or are they scared of it, your customers, or how do you embrace that or use it in your solutions?
Yeah, definitely. So maybe let's start on the loyalty side again, because that's very easy, right? When you are doing a loyalty scheme and trying to sort of drive customer engagement and stickiness, having a feedback loop, or even having the ability to let your user base shape the direction in which that loyalty scheme goes, right? Sometimes a loyalty scheme will give you, in the cashback example, you'll be able to buy in certain merchants. Having the user base be able to vote on which merchants you actively go after to add to that scheme in the future, it makes it quite dynamic. When we got things, Peter mentioned a big sort of music deal before. Beatport is a client we're supporting in the sort of electronic music space, in sort of collaboration with Polkadot. For them, community engagement could look like fans being able to shape what the future of the music side of that loyalty program looks like. Or in film, if you're telling a story of these kind of loyalty programs, you can shape that narrative as you move forward. So lots you can play with there, and that's probably where I've seen the most interesting stuff so far. However, even if you want to bring it back fully to corporate governance, different enterprises globally have different approaches on how to deal with sort of staff feedback and different operating models, right? So having the ability to have certain decisions be crowd-based. The interesting thing about this blockchain governance technology is it makes democracy very efficient. It's very easy to hold a vote quickly around any topic. So having decisions kind of bubble up much more from the ground up is useful. But then much more deep tech, if you look at it from an abstract perspective, you have the ability to essentially reach consensus around. People always talk about blockchain as this database, but it's much more important to consider blockchain as a way of transitioning between state in a database. The process on how we all agree, the changing of what is in the database is what is the most important thing about blockchain. And that's all about governance, right? What is the governance protocol around how we all agree with different incentives on how we're going to update some data set, whether it's financial records, pharmaceutical records, personal data, image rights, whatever it is, everything is about that governance protocol consensus. So yeah, I think it's fundamental to the technology and applications.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't agree more. I think, and this is also, let me summarize, because I think it's clear that a lot is happening around the world. And of course, Alan and Peter, you guys are in it every day, and myself too. I see real adoption is happening. I think, of course, you can use it to improve your existing processes in an enterprise, integrate it into your existing architectures. More and more blockchains will become more modular, and also listening to Peter. So that will just become easier and easier, because there's no point replacing something that's working well with something new. It's actually how do you enhance what you have. And I think then in the new concept, how do you integrate your token economics that's relevant to your business into your solutions, and how do you actually get more stickiness with your customer by applying some of these governance and incentive principles that you can use with your token? I think that can really transform the way you operate your business. So enough said. So thank you very much, Laurie. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Ellen, for your contributions. It's 2:00 in the UK, so we'll call it a day. And everything will be recorded. So for the big fans, if you want to rewatch it again, you can. And I'm sure it will be published somewhere else. But thank you all for participating, and thank you, panelists, for your contributions.